Okay. Ready?
Yeah, bo. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third and last session on grant writing. So today we're going to be looking at sustainability consideration, budget development, and justification. So as I indicated during yesterday's session, that today we're going to be looking at the money and how you plan and how you put together your budget, as that's very integral and important when applying for a grant. It's equally important even when you're applying for a bursary. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so I'm going to pick up from where we left off yesterday. During our Q&A session, there was a question that was posed around inception report. Itumeleng, I hope you are with us. I did a bit of research around the inception report, and I actually found it interesting in terms of what it is that it encapsulates and what it covers. And sometimes it's really about the terminology that we use, because I found that as I was reading about what the inception report entails, it was very much aligned to or similar to the progress reports, as I had indicated yesterday, the progress report that we are expected to write as part of the grant process. So it's about shortly after you start the project, how have you put things together? What have you done? And how are you envisaging things going forward in terms of the resources, in terms of all the processes, the project's plans being put into actions. And I found this document around writing an inception report, and it says organizations use inception reports to account for progress on particular projects after the activity has begun. So after you've been given a grant, and you're starting with the grant, you're reporting on the progress of where things are. So if you're also working with multiple stakeholders, it's about keeping the stakeholders in the loop in terms of how the progress, or rather the project is doing. And many or other projects don't require inception reports. Hence, I also said I had never come across it, because in my own personal project, that has never been a requirement. And in many of the grants report that I'm aware of, it's not part of the things that are required. But what it entails is very much similar to what one would provide to the funder, the organization that's giving you money to provide progress on the work that you're doing. Okay, and as it indicates here, it's particularly recommended for complex or high budget projects. So if you have a project that where you're given 10,000 Rand or 30,000 Rand, that might not be necessary. But if you're going to be given 10 million Rand, for example, that might be a requirement. So it's usually, as stated here, required for high budget progress, right? Ensuring that everybody understands their role, the activity timelines, and any compliance requirements. If you had said within the first 6 months, this is what you would have accomplished, what you would have put in place, it's also a moment or an opportunity for you to reflect also as the project leader or as the project team. And with the inception report or the progress report, it's also around the idea that you might have planned for 1, 2, and 3, but as you started, you found that actually some of the things that you had planned are not easily accessible. They were not easy to put in place. You might think of doing things differently. So it offers you, but also the funder, the opportunity to say, okay, I'm rethinking 1, 2, and 3. Would that be in order? Because if you're going to veer off what you had promised, it's important for you to engage with the funder so that they give you the go-ahead to be able to do this. And then another part of the question was, what is entailed in an inception report? How does one write it? What's included? And here again is a very good example of how one can imagine putting together an inception report. So it's who has prepared the report. So it could be you in consultation with your team members. It could be the whole team sitting together, collaboratively putting together the report. And then you give the table of contents in terms of what is going to be in the report, what can be expected in the report. And then as you'll see, the introduction, methodology, work plan. So you provide details and an update on the different aspects of the project in terms of where you are, what you've managed to do. And also it's an opportunity for inputs as well, especially if the report is shared with other stakeholders. So let's say you're doing a project around health issues and you're working with clinics or hospitals or the Department of Health. So this report, if it's made available to those that you're working with, there is also an opportunity for feedback as well. So as I've indicated, your work plan is very important because it has to be aligned with what you had promised when you applied for the grant, right? It's about initial evaluation of the work, and you can structure it providing the timeline from where you started, where you are right now. You can provide a chart, a table, also visually showing the trajectory of the work that you're doing. And as I've also indicated, any changes in the timelines proposed in the inception report should be formally communicated and agreed upon. Okay, and then just lastly, the inception report should be used throughout the project period to track progress and inform decisions. So what you did at the beginning and where you started, you always go back to where you began. You always go back to what you had promised. You always go back to the timelines that you had set out for yourself. Are you at the point where you were hoping to be at 9 months into the project or not? And what were the issues or challenges, right? It's an important tool in evaluating all the aspects of the project, as I've indicated, and it can assist you to determine whether the personnel, project members, the finances, the budget, the timelines, and other components are adequate for successful completion of various activities. If you do a progress report or an inception report, 6 months, 9 months into the project, you look at the money that you've already spent and the money that was given to you, and thinking ahead in terms of the activities that still need to be done. Can you see the funds still assisting you to be able to achieve your goals? Is it linked to bad planning, or is it linked to things changing along the way? There might be a machinery or a tool that you had not anticipated that you would need, but as you started doing your work, running your experiments, you realize that, oh my goodness, okay, I actually need that particular tool for me to be able to do this work. Maybe you were hoping that you would use the lab of a colleague or a collaborator. Maybe that's not available anymore. You need to rethink certain things. So some of the things that you had thought would be available and therefore informed your budgeting, when you start with the project, finding that things are changing along the way, these are some of the things that an inception report would assist you to be able to determine, to rethink, to engage on, and to also look at how the work will proceed going forward. Okay, so some grant some funders actually want such a report to assist them to be able to evaluate early on where the work is, and also to just get an idea of where you're going with the project that you're doing. Okay. All right, Itu, I hope that has answered your question, and I hope that it is useful for others as well. Okay, so now we can start with today's focus. And as I indicated, today we're going to be talking about budgeting and the importance of making sure that you budget properly. As I've just indicated now, if you're going to be requiring any tools, any lab equipment, it's very important that you ensure that you get all the necessary quotations beforehand. And if maybe some of your collaborators have promised that they'll make available or accessible some of their working space, that all of these things are agreed upon in time, so that you have all this knowledge with you as you work on your budget. Important to engage with HR where you are situated. It's important to engage with the research directorate or research office where you are situated, to assist you to be able to plan properly. We don't want to get a grant for 5 million only to find that your project actually wants 10 million. All right. So that is bad planning. You can never know for sure, especially if the project is going to be long term. You're looking at 3 years or 5 years, and we know that prices go up. You know, there's inflation, right? So you need to account for that also as you budget for your project. Okay, so what we're going to now be focusing on today is the art of making funds chase you and not you chasing the funds. And what do we mean by this? It's important that you plan in advance. It's important that you plan well. It's important that you start thinking about applying for grants as early as now. I find that some of the grants or scholarships that I got while I was a master's and a doctoral student have actually contributed towards the grants that I got later on. So when you have shown that you are capable of managing funds very well, when you have shown that your work is worthy of being funded, it becomes easier for other funders to be willing to fund the work that you're doing, right? Yesterday, there was a question around busy with my master's right now, busy with my PhD right now. So it might be difficult for me to consider applying for a grant for a different project. And as I indicated, it doesn't have to be a different project. And if it's a fund that requires you to have your supervisor applying on your behalf or alongside you, go for it, because this is something that's going to go onto your CV. You can write on your CV that you had the NRF what grant, right? And that already speaks to, and it boosts your CV. And this is what we mean by, ensuring that you make funds chase you. When funders ask for expression of interest, or when they ask for all the documents and information pertaining to applying for funds, it also includes your CV as well. It includes your personal narrative or motivation for applying for the fund. And when they look at your CV and they see that, oh, you've actually had funding before, then it also assists them to say, okay, we can trust this person with our money. It also says, oh, okay, this other funder, so-and-so, has given this person money, then chances of this person's project succeeding, or chances of this person managing the fund that we will entrust them with are very high. So you give them something to work with, something to start from, right? So it assists you that way. So the earlier you start, the better. It's never too early, right? It's never too early. So look out for possible funding opportunities that might be there for you. And then moving from theory in terms of thinking about grant application, thinking about the budget, to thinking about how you practically put it together, right? The grantsmanship in practice. Do your homework. So it's not about knowing or understanding about grant application. It's not just attending a session on grant application, but it's also about actually checking as much as possible around the grants that are available, but also looking at, again, the kind of work that you're doing and how it's aligned to what's relevant right now, how it's aligned to the national imperatives, how it's aligned to the needs in our communities, and being able to justify that as well, right? So because you also want to do work that is going to be meaningful for the context that you're finding yourself in, right? So do your research. What are the South African national imperatives right now? What are the SDGs that are there? Do you know what they are, right? So conducting targeted research, how you choose your topic, how you choose your research question, helps you to find the right funders to partner with and support your research. Just today, there were a number of calls that were shared with colleagues around grant applications, three, just in one day. So there's always opportunities for grant applications, for possibilities for funding, and understanding what funders are looking for will assist you also to think about how to carve your research idea, right? And in the first session, we spoke about understanding what it is that the funders are looking for. You're not going to send a proposal around climate change for a funder that is maybe looking at the challenges and issues around gender-based violence, for example. So you need to send the right proposal to the right funder, because that is going to be key for you to find a match. It's going to be key for you to know where your research belongs, right? So your own interests, your own focus area, how that's aligned to the priorities of the funder is very critical. You don't want to waste your time. You also don't want to waste the funder's time. And then when you apply in future, you're not going to be that person that, you know, when they see your name, then they're like, oh, okay, it's that one who does not read properly, and they send things that are not aligned to what we're looking for. Okay, so your priorities and that of the funder must be aligned. Okay, so it's very, very critical. Present a logical solution to a problem. We've attended to this. So you've identified a problem. It's not about just identifying a problem. Many funders are also very much interested in practical solutions. You have the space and the freedom and the opportunity to think, to be curious, to do research now for your honors, masters, and doctoral studies, so that you can earn a qualification, so that you can contribute towards knowledge production, so that you can contribute to our thinking on particular issues. And of course, ideally, especially at PhD level, we would like also to see the possible practical implications or policy implications or a framework or a model, a contribution to the discipline that you plan to bring forth as part of your qualification and the attainment of that qualification. But you then need to stretch yourself and think further and move further than the theory to move to the practical implications of the work that you're doing. So if you are suggesting and proposing a particular project, and you have a question, you've identified a problem, you also need to think about how the research that you're going to do, the work that you're going to do, the actions that you're going to take can possibly lead to a practical or logical solution to the identified problem. Because this is what many funders want, to say, we want to eliminate or alleviate poverty. We want to shift and contribute towards health outcomes of communities. So your work needs to respond to that in practical ways. How is your work going to provide a rethinking or steps towards us realizing healthy communities, towards us realizing the reduction in poverty? So what is it that needs to be put in place? What is it that needs to be done for this to happen? So you need to push yourself, think further if you're applying for a grant. Think of your proposal as a story, right? So with the beginning, you start with a story about this problem that you've identified, this idea that you have, this issue that requires us to pay attention to it. And then you go on to tell us why it's important for us to pay attention to this issue. And have others paid attention to it? How have they paid attention to it? Right? So you go to the middle and say, okay, you're suggesting that we pay attention to it in these particular ways. And the steps that we need to take are 1, 2, and 3. And the relevant methodology for us to do this is this, and this is how we can go about doing it. When we have done this, we can then anticipate that in the end, this problem, this idea that I had at the beginning will have a solution, will have a way forward, will assist us with a rethinking, will assist us to realize the possibility of the reduction of poverty, to realize proper and quality education for all the children in the land, right? So you tell a story. So as you work on your problem or project description, think of it as this narrative that you're telling, so that even when your reviewer sits with your work, they can see the thread that runs through. They can see how you are telling this story, all right? So think of your proposal that way. I know some of you are still busy with your own proposal for master's and PhD, and you'll be submitting to higher degrees committees soon, which is wonderful. But sit with your proposal and look at it and see how your proposal tells the story about this phenomenon that you have identified and that you think we should pause and give attention to, that you want to pause and spend the next 2 to 3 years giving attention to. Okay. And by doing this, being clear, being logical, and clearly showing why it's important for us to give attention to this problem, that's your way of convincing the funder that you know what you're doing, because everything leads from one place or one point to the next. So there is logic in what you are suggesting. You are showing the funder that you know what you're talking about. They can read your proposal and get it. They read your proposal and they can see the scientific merit of it. They can see why it's important to give attention to this issue. They can see why it's pertinent for them to fund this project that you're suggesting. Okay, so you're putting yourself out there to say, this is an important project that deserves you to give money towards. It should demonstrate, as I've indicated, clarity and understanding of the need in your community, the need in the research field, and the importance of the programmatic response, doing this work, doing this program, this project, that it's necessary for us to be able to respond to the need that is out there in the community. After reading your proposal, the funder should feel confident that you would be a responsible and competent steward of their funds. And you can do this by presenting a solid plan and highlighting the skills and experience of all the project team members. Okay, so when everything is clear like that, then it makes it easier for the funder to be convinced and say, oh, okay, this makes sense. I get it, right? I get it. It's clear. And the same way that you do this in the actual body, the content of the proposal, you also need to do the same when it comes to the budgeting of the project, right? So all the things that you've indicated in the proposal have to be visible in the budget, in how you put the budget together. So the budget has to respond and be aligned to the proposal that you have put together, right? Oftentimes, and this is what we find when we review proposals, many of us spend a lot of time writing proposals, making sure that we have all the literature in place, making sure that the objectives and aims are so clear, and you work and work and work, and you put the project together. And then at the end, you're like, okay, you spend 5 minutes putting down a budget. Okay, I need this, I'm going to need that, I'm going to need that, I'm going to need this. And then you put a budget together. And it comes across as an afterthought. And as I've indicated in our first session, some of the reviewers pay close attention to the budget with an understanding that if the budget is in place, it makes sense, things have been budgeted for accordingly, then it means the proposal is also very well thought out, because for each line item in your budget, it has to show in how you've put your proposal together. Okay, so the budget should never be an afterthought. It should be clear why you want this 5 million. It should be clear, it must show in the budget why all these different items are necessary as well. So your budget should not be an afterthought at all, okay? As I spoke about telling the story with your proposal, it's also important to tell that story in how you put together your budget as well. And so I thought I should give some examples of budget items that you can consider, or that are often considered by funders, but also you as the project leader, things that you can think about, the typical things that are often in the budget item. Okay, so you'll see there's different types here of budgets, and attention also to the budgets. The one on the right is focusing a lot on the personnel. And then the one on the left is personnel, but also including other expenses that are linked to the running of the project. Okay, so your research personnel. So this is your yourself, for example. All of these colleagues beyond the research personnel are part of the research project. Your principal researcher or investigator, the PI, is it going to be just one PI? Are you collaborating with someone in another region, in another country? And then you are co-PIs, also based on the context that you're in. So how many of you? And then what costs are going to be linked to the PI? Right? So it's important to also think about that. And then your team members, the core researchers, if you have them, how many are you anticipating, are you planning to have? So this cannot be an afterthought that, oh, it would be good to have 2 core researchers. It would be great to have 4 core researchers. You need to think it through and say, we're going to need so many core researchers, maybe 2 here in South Africa and 2 there in the other country, or 3 and 3, and what is going to be their roles and their contribution to the project, right? And then research assistants as well that you would be needing, and what is going to be their role. So always thinking about the purpose of having a particular line item. postdoctoral associates? Are you going to have postdoctoral fellows? Are you thinking of appointing 1 or 2 or 3, and why? Right? So for the number of associates that you decide to have, there must also be a reason as well. And these could be people at different levels, right? So the research assistant assisting me with collecting data, assisting with the analysis, and what is it that the postdoctoral associate is going to do? What is it that you're going to have the graduate students doing? So maybe as part of the project, you're going to recruit 2 or 4 graduate students, and how are they going to be part of the project? In some research or some projects, research assistants are the graduate students. So they assist with the collecting of data, the analyzing of data, working with the data. And then from that, they also draw data or work that will then become their own doctoral work or master's work, right? So we also need to know what is the role of each. Do you need research assistants as well as graduate students, or do you only maybe need graduate students who can also or will serve as research assistant in the project? Why? Why do you need all these different line items? And then other professionals such as the technician, again, what kind of research are you going to be doing? Do you need a technician? What is the technician going to be doing? Do you need a programmer? What kind of work are you doing? Are you doing work in the health facility? And the resources that are there in those spaces might be useful for you. And if maybe you're going to be working with people in that field, are you also going to give them a stipend for their time or what? So for example, if you are in the health sector, working alongside or with the nurses, what are they going to serve as? Are they going to also be research assistants? What is it that their role is going to be? A statistician as well? Project assistant, administrative assistance that you're going to be needing as part of the project. Maybe someone who's going to be assisting you with the bookings, if you need to attend conferences, if maybe you're putting together an event to make sure that they market the event, they invite speakers, and all the other administrative duties that are part of this project. So you need to think about all these things so that if you are intending to also schedule and put together a seminar or a conference as part of the grant or the project, what is it that is involved, that is entailed in putting together a conference? Have you ever put together a conference before? You need to be able to know and understand this. It might require booking of venues, there's catering, there's invitation of speakers, paying for their travel and all of that. So you need to account for all those things as well. Okay. And then the benefits also, if maybe you're going to be working with academic staff, people doing and already getting a salary. Sometimes when you apply for a grant, you can also apply for an allowance for the team members. So you're not necessarily getting paid for doing the work, but you get an allowance, so to speak. So some financial benefit. And if that's the plan and it's catered for by the funder, then it's something that you also need to specifically indicate and cater for. And if you are attached to an academic institution, this is something that you also need to double check with the institution, whether you are allowed that you can be able to do that, to benefit financially from being part or by being part of the project. Okay. And then on the other side, again, some similar things, but also other things that they're indicating as well, that you're planning to have interviews, and these interviews are going to be in a different country. So there's going to be traveling there. How many interviews are you anticipating? If you're saying you're planning to have 50 interviews, the funding has to be aligned to that. If you happen to end up with 40 or 45 interviews, that's okay. But if you go beyond 50 interviews, then you might run short when it comes to your budgeting, and that might affect the project, right? You don't want to end up doing work that you're not going to be using at the end of the day, because that's also unethical. Okay. And then stipends, linked to the other one as well, stipends for yourself as the PI and the co-PI, if there's a need for that. So you can budget for yourself to also get a stipend as a researcher. Okay, and then graduate assistants spoke to that. And then the actual research, the technical things as well, transcription of interviews. If you're going to be using a statistician, again, being able to pay, and also depending on where you're doing the research, the work might need to be translated. And this also means if you are working with interviewers in that region, local people, they also need to be accommodated financially as well. And then the travel. If you want to go to a conference, you need to budget for that as well. If you want to put together a conference, you need to budget for that as well. So this just gives an overview, really, of what you can anticipate or think about when you put together a budget proposal for a grant. There's some similarities for those of you who've got the UNISA bursary. You'll note that your transcription and translation is covered. I think there's also support for you to attend a conference, even though I think the university only pays for your registration fee for this. If you need a laptop, if you need recorders. So there are some standard things in terms of what one needs when you conduct research. But for a big grant that runs over an extended period of time, there are additional things that one needs to think about as well. And if it's a huge project, obviously you also need to think seriously about personnel, and ensuring that also you only don't have 3 people that are expected to be doing all this work, right? So if the funding is there, make sure that you try as much as possible to accommodate other people who can be part of the project, because that also contributes towards capacity building. Because by being part of such a project, a person is going to come out there with skills, right? They're going to come out there with a better understanding of research and having learned through the process of being part of this project. And that then ultimately contributes towards capacity building. And that is something that is really considered very highly. And just then coming back to your engagement with putting together the project and thinking about working through the application, and realizing and understanding that sometimes some of these things are not easy. Some of these things don't just come easily to all of us. Sometimes you get stuck as well. Sometimes you have questions. Don't sit with those questions and feel stuck and end up submitting a subpar project. Remember that funders are people as well. And they have presented themselves to say they want to provide funding because they actually are interested in the work that can be done to advance all the changes that we want to see in the world. If in doubt, pick up the call. If they have given a phone call saying for queries or questions, here's a number, call that number, okay? Sometimes when you send an email, it can be insufficient, or you might not be able to articulate yourself well in the same way that you would if maybe you were having a conversation with someone. There's something about actually experiencing another human being. A real person will read your proposal, right? So the proposal is not going to be read or reviewed by a machine. It's other human beings that are going to be looking at it, and they know what they're looking for. They know what they want. Many of the staff in some of these foundations that offer funding, they're sitting there in their offices, and they're willing and looking forward to sometimes to assisting you. They're receptive to the phone calls. If they can help you to submit a better proposal. If you are unsure about something, just call and say, here at this point where it says you need this and that and that, am I correct in understanding it as meaning this or wanting this? Or if I include this or I answer it in this way, would that be acceptable? Would that make sense? Right? Because it's not a competition where everybody must just figure things out for themselves. No, it's about ensuring that you have as best a proposal as possible, because the funder actually wants the work to be done. Others may not call because they get it, they understand, or they think they do. But if you have the opportunity to ask questions, I would really, really encourage you to ask questions. Okay, and then sustainability when working on a project. You need to think about your project beyond its lifespan, to say beyond the 3 years, beyond the 5 years, what is it that I'm hoping for in terms of this work that I'm suggesting right now. So you also need to have a sustainability plan to say the lifespan of the project is not the end, right? It's a document where you describe how your project will be sustained in the long run. Maybe beyond the 3 years, you would still like to continue with the work. How are you planning to do so? So it focuses on community sustainability. It focuses on financial sustainability. It focuses on organizational sustainability. So what is relevant for you in terms of what you're proposing? If you're going to be working with the community on a particular issue, there should be continuity beyond you in that community or beyond you spending time in that community. How is your project going to provide an enabling environment that is going to think towards the future in terms of the community actually imagining, or the project or change that comes about as a result of your project, that it does not die when the project ends? What are the possibilities of going forward? What possible partnerships can be forged in terms of ensuring a financially sustainable future for the project if needs be? Okay. Many funders are interested in this idea of sustainability because the lifespan of a project or funding can be time limited, but they also see giving you funding as a way to plant a seed. And that seed needs to be nurtured and watered, that when they close the tap, that you'll find another source of watering that plant, that the plant is not going to die, right? So there you describe the different aspects in which the project has to be sustained in the long run to still function. So these are some of the things that you also need to think about moving beyond the project that you are suggesting. Okay. And this means 5 million spent over 3 years, over 5 years, and beyond the 5 years, you don't want to go back to engaging that issue or go back to that community and find that things are now back to where they used to be. Like things stopped because you stopped going, or because you stopped engaging, or because the project ended. Then it's almost as if the money that was spent went to waste. So how will this assist in bringing about consistent change going forward? Okay. So as we say here, sustainability gives you and the donor reassurance that the grant is well spent, as I've just said, and will have a long-lasting impact, even once the support runs out or it comes to an end. Oh yeah, and here's the plant, and it's about how you're nurturing the plant, right? How you keeping it alive. financial sustainability is about how you're able to maintain and continue work before the funding period, or beyond the funding period. Will you apply for more funding? How are you envisaging the future beyond the 3 years or the 5 years? Funders award grants to support projects only for a fixed period of time. We know this. They are therefore concerned about how projects they fund can go beyond the funding period. They want assurance that their money will be put to good use and have long-term impacts for those that the project was geared towards. Okay, so it's about really the benefits, but not just the immediate benefits, but the benefits going forward, the benefits towards the future. And then institutional or organizational sustainability. This refers to ensuring proper working systems that were developed as part of the project, right? So if as part of the project you established a lab and you've got equipment and you've got students working there, and you're working on particular experiments or research protocols, how is that going to continue beyond the work that you're doing? For example, those who are working in the nano field, maybe working in nanotechnology, you might be looking at a particular focus or project right now. But those who might still be interested, or those who will come into the project, need to also imagine or think about how that which has been put in place can still continue. So again, thinking about the project beyond yourself when thinking about sustainability. And then program sustainability, you being able to continue a project and programs in the absence of donor support. Can this work? Can this project still survive and thrive outside of the money that you have been given? So beyond the 3 years, do you see or anticipate the project still continuing in other ways in terms of the resources that you have to ensure that the program still continues, maybe until another funding comes along? But will the project stop because there's no funding, and then it will wait until you secure another funding before it can continue? Because there's never really surety and timeline in terms of when next you'll get another funding. So will you work for 3 years and then stop and wait for another funding, which might come in a year or 2 or 3? What happens in the meantime? So it's important to also think seriously about how to sustain the program or the project that you have initiated. And then this is just really what I've just said in a nutshell, right? So the project sustainability, it's about community support and ensuring continuity beyond the funding. It's also about integration into existing systems and political support. So if you're doing work around issues of health, if you, as part of the project, have established relationships and projects and programs that can be used by clinics or hospitals, these need to be able to function and work and hopefully be integrated into the health system itself, so that it can function and just continue even outside of the funding cycle, even outside of the project that you have initiated, right? And when you're talking about political support, it's also linked to issues of policy. So if something maybe becomes legislated, if maybe you're doing work focusing on gender-based violence, and you're saying these are some of the practical things that the government can do, that the South African police services can do as part of responding to the challenges of gender-based violence. These are some of the things that can be integrated into how the system functions. Then that's a win for you, because when the program is done, next time when you go to the police services or police station, if it has been legislated or been put into policy, then you know that that program will be there and it exists and it will continue to help our communities moving into the future in the journey towards combating the challenge of gender-based violence. That is sustainability, right? That the project lives beyond you. Spoken about organizational sustainability, having multiple sources of funding where possible by all means. So the fact that you've received a grant should not stop you from applying for other grants as well. So there's never a conflict of interest, really, when it comes to applying for grants. Of course, you're going to read the guidelines, you're going to read the requirements, you're going to check whether the funder says you cannot simultaneously hold another grant while you have our grant. But again, this is something that you can check with the funder, right? But majority of them do not bar you from applying for other funding, applying for other sources of money, and that can go into the project that you have. So usually when we write acknowledgements, you will indicate that this project was generally funded by so and so and so and so and so and so. Sometimes it might even be 3 funders, and you just acknowledge all of them accordingly. That's all that is needed. So you can have multiple sources of funding. So don't relax and sit back and say, okay, I have a grant now. I can just relax. It is possible. It is possible to hold multiple grants at the same time. And if that's possible and feasible, by all means, go for it. Okay, and then sustainability also, it's about training people. It's about skills development. Again, something that people can apply elsewhere. Skills that someone can work tomorrow as a research consultant as a result of maybe working on your project or being part of your project, right? You work with community members who can assist as integral part of the project, that next time when maybe a research assistant is needed or someone to assist you in another project is needed, a person can say, I've worked on this project before, I've learned these skills, I can do 1, 2, and 3. So the training also forms part of sustainability. Adaptability of the approaches or approach that you use, how these can shift and change and be adapted over time is also important. In monitoring and evaluation and sharing of the results is important because it also contributes towards others taking the work forward. Based on the project that you've done, I can come across your work and then continue to maybe build from where you left off. Okay, so the sharing of results is also important for the continuity and sustainability of the work that you're doing. And being coherent mission, theory of change. It's about making the world a better place. It's about social justice. It's about bringing about change and responding to challenges and issues that we have in the world. So sustainability is about continuity in terms of going forward with the work that we're doing. And then lastly, I thought I could maybe just speak a little bit about the NRF and the funding that they offer to graduate students, right? So we're going to explore the NRF template because the NRF does provide grants for master's and doctoral students. They actually even offer support, I think, for honors students as well, and interns in research as well, where a student can be placed in an institution under a supervisor to be able to gain some experience in that space. Okay, and I'm providing this as an example to also just give you an idea. If you have not been on the NRF website, I would like to encourage you to please go on the NRF website, play around with it a little bit, create a profile. It's almost as if you're creating an online CV. It will always be there. 5, 10 years from now, it will be there, and you can always build on it and add on it. And the beauty with it is that regardless of what kind of grant you are applying for, you can always draw from the existing CV that's there in the system. So what you would need to do is just to articulate and provide details of the specific funding that you are applying for. So it really limits your work in the long run. In the beginning, it can feel overwhelming because it's a lot of things to contend with and to consider. And these are the things to contend with and to consider. Okay, so here's an overview of the topic areas of the funding from the NRF called Tutuka. I hope you are aware of the Tutuka grant, that some of you have come across the Tutuka grant. It really provides generous financial support to graduate students to be able to perform their work. And again, here, as you think about applying for grants in future, this already kind of prepares you for that. Because you're required to provide your project information. This should be easy for you because you already have a project. You have your PhD topic, you have your master's topic that you're already working on, you have your proposal already approved, or you're working on your chapter. So you have information on your project, and then specific details of the research, and it guides you in terms of what specific things that it's looking for. Right? And then, as we've indicated, you don't do research for the sake of doing research. You do research because you want to see impact based on the research that you're doing. So what are the possible solutions, or what are the possible ways that your work is going to assist us to rethink a particular issue? How is your work going to contribute towards knowledge production? How is your work going to contribute towards taking forward the discipline, social impact as well? So it's impact in various ways. And depending on your work, you can think about how you are imagining the possible impact of your work. So you're asked about that potential impact, and then your problem statement, the rationale and literature review. As you can see, these are things that are already there in the work that you're doing already. Your aims and objectives, right? Methodology and proposed research plan. All of these things you got. You should be all set. And then the details of the research. Again, we spoke about the relevance, we spoke about the social, national imperatives, we spoke about the SDGs, we spoke about Agenda 2063, we spoke about the research that has got impact, and also the importance of transformation as well. How is your work contributing towards the transformation agenda? How is it contributing towards that? And you need to think about this because, again, as UNISA, the institution is very serious about the project of transformation. When you're talking about decolonization, Africanization, how is your work also advancing our rethinking in centering Africa as knowledge producing hub, but also Africa as a possible place where we can think and imagine solutions for problems and challenges that are confronting us. Okay, and then anticipated outputs. One of the outputs that are obvious is that you're going to attain your qualification, right? And also, you're going to be publishing research outputs, right? If there are any other outputs that you're anticipating, then you mention those as well. And then, as I've indicated, how is your work aligned to the national imperatives? Do you know what the national imperatives are? So that's very important. data management and utilization. So what's going to happen to the data? How is it going to be used? How is it going to be disseminated? So all these things are there on the NRF website for you to give attention to when you apply to TUCA. And I'm showing this to you to also show what goes into applying for a grant, whether it's a grant for your master's or doctoral degree, or it's a grant for a big project beyond your PhD or your master's, in terms of some of the things that you need to think about, right? So attachments here, it would be your proof of registration that you are a registered student. And if you already have publications, by all means, you submit those as well, so that they're there in the system. And for the research that you're doing, you need to attach your ethical clearance. You need to indicate whether you have ethical clearance already or not. And then you also need to choose your preferred panel. And here we're talking about people that are going to review your work. This is something that's very unique to the NRF, because many funders, institutions that assist with funding do not offer people the opportunity to choose whom they would like to have as reviewers of their work. So I find that a very interesting and unique thing about the NRF. So they would ask you whom should they consider as reviewers for your application. So this then means you need to know people in your field. It cannot be your supervisor, right? It needs to be other scholars. And I think they ask for, 5 names or so. It gives them a pool to choose from, but these will be people who are going to review your work. I think it's 5 or 6 names. So you then need to be aware of people in your field. You need to be aware of people who are in the same research interest area as yourself, people whose work you've read, people whom you might have met at conferences, people whose work you admire, anything, but people who there has to be a reason why you're choosing that particular person. And that's something that you need to answer as well. So if you're saying Prof. Buleng Sagalo as a possible reviewer, you also need to then indicate why have you chosen Prof. Sagalo to be your reviewer. So you then need to provide reasons for that, right? And then the budget, they're also operating costs, and then other sources of funding as well, if you have any. So you might be having a UNISA bursary, and you indicate there that I currently hold a UNISA bursary, or I've applied for a UNISA bursary. Okay. And then you indicate all the operating costs, what's going to be needed. Do you need a laptop? Do you need to travel? Do you need money for transcription? Do you need money to go into the field? And they do indicate what it is that they do not fund. So when you go online and you check, you can have your budget or things that you would like financial assistance with, but they will also indicate that this and that is not funded. So that when you actually indicate things there, you already know what it is that is not covered. Okay, and then the student resources, what resources do you require? What resources do you have? Student support, the National Infrastructure Platform, not sure what that is, and then science engagement. Again here, science engagement also speaks to issues around public science. It also speaks to how you communicate your work. It also speaks to how does your work travel beyond just the academic outputs that you have in the form of book chapters or articles. And then other members, if there are any. So for your studies, we're expecting that you're the only person working on your research. And then references, if you've referred to other people's work. And then the CV is there already. So you don't attach your CV. There's a template for the CV where you input all your information. Registration details, so your name, your ID number, all of that your contact details, career profile. I'm Puleng Sakalo. I hold a master's degree in this particular field. Maybe that is if you are applying and you are a doctoral student, or you indicate that you have an honors degree, so you need assistance for your master's studies. So your career profile, what qualifications do you have? And then the research expertise, also here you give information in terms, so think of keywords in terms of the research expertise that you have, that you're working on. Student supervision record, that may not be applicable to you because you're still a student yourself. So this is just the general application, and there's also the Tutuka grants for those who have completed their studies. I've spoken about the personal profile, and here is where you tell us about who you are. And this does not mean that you are so-and-so, you were born in this town in this year, you grew up there, you went to this primary school. No. It's the personal research profile. I actually think that's the proper way that they should have said it, because I've actually seen colleagues giving us their personal bio about where they grew up. But this refers to the personal research profile, right? That you are so-and-so, you hold an honors degree in this particular field and a master's degree in that field. Your specialization in terms of your research areas, this, that, and that. You have had the opportunity to present at 2 conferences, and you have a publication that's currently under review. So things like that. So that's your personal profile. And then absence from research. Again, this is something I think that is very crucial that the NRF does, because it offers people the opportunity to be able to explain why there's been a gap, if there is, in their research, in their work. So you did your master's in 2012, and now you have registered for your PhD in 2023. So it offers you the opportunity to say, where have you been? What have you been up to, right? And that then assists them to be able to understand what the cause of that absence is. Obviously, they're not asking you to divulge all your personal things, no. And this is usually helpful for women researchers, right? Either when you're still studying or when you are already in academia like ourselves. Where sometimes when you apply for funding, especially these grants that are aimed at people who are still studying, there would be an age limit, and then they would say this is available to people who are up to 40 years. And then here I am, I'm 43 years old, and I don't qualify, right? So here it gives you the opportunity to say, no, in the past 5 years or in the past 7 years, I was absent from research because I was starting a family. I was a mother, and therefore had to take a break to focus on family issues. And now I'm in a position where I can and I would like to continue with my research. This is important because it's also another way to redress the imbalances of the past, right? Where women never got the opportunity. And also where, when we say age limit is 40, we're not taking into consideration that when people have family duties or circumstances linked to their family that makes them not to be able to do their research at a time that they would like to, that they are not disadvantaged as a result. You know, that I stopped for 5 years because I was raising my children. I wanted to make sure that I focus on my family. Now I come back and you're telling me that I'm too old to be given this funding. That's unfair, right? So they try and provide for that. So that's why some of these have been included. And then disability, books, chapters in books. So here it's just them asking you if you have any disability, if you've published any books, if you've got any book chapters in books, if you've published any articles. And if you have, you will provide those details there. Any patents, any peer-reviewed conference outputs, any products that came out of your research, any artifacts, if you've produced any artifacts, prototypes as a result of the research that you've done, or any other recognized research output. So there's an openness in terms of the possibility of some of the outputs that are possible as part of the research that you would have done. Okay, so that in a nutshell just gives you an overview of what you can expect when you apply for the NRF. And the online system is practically standard. And I'm saying that because a few years from now, a number of years from now, especially for those of you who are based here in South Africa and who are interested in academia and who would like to maybe even become NRF rated in the future, this is a good moment to start so that you build your profile, right? But also, what I've just shown you in terms of the template of the NRF is a standard template that even when I apply for the NRF funding tomorrow, or I apply for rating, that's how the screen is going to look like for me as well. And as I said, along the way, then you indicate I'm applying for rating, I'm applying for a postdoc, I'm applying for Tutuka grant for master's studies, or I'm applying for Tutuka grant for PhD studies. So all the actual template itself is the same. The differences come when you click for what it is that you are applying for. And as I indicated earlier, it's very important that if you are envisaging this future for yourself, then the earlier you start, the better, because this is going to remain the CV that you have in the system for years to come. And obviously, along the way, you're going to be updating it. So now you're a student. When you're done with your studies, you go to your profile on the NRF, and then where it says qualification, you indicate the PhD obtained UNISA 2023 or 2024 or 2025. And when you have published a paper also, same thing. But now also with the online databases that we have, like ORCID, for example, if you have an ORCID profile, the NRF has moved towards, what do you call it now? Towards combining your online profile linked to these research databases like ORCID to your NRF profile. And what this is assisting us to do now is that when you publish papers, you don't have to now manually go to the NRF page and input these outputs. That if it's linked to your ORCID profile, then you just go to a profile, there's something that you click, and then you just make sure that those articles are then also appearing on your NRF profile as well. Okay. So yeah, I think I'm going to stop here and then open up for us to have a conversation. And all of these at the end is about really you working out a project that is feasible, that is well thought out, and thinking about the budget and ensuring that the budget that you put together is aligned to the money, or rather the project that you are applying for. Okay. All right, so let's see if we have any questions today. And let's have a chat. Okay, let me move. All right. Danelle, I'm not sure if this is linked to yesterday. In terms of the budget section, if the grant giver is, for example, giving you 120,000 Rand, right? When drafting your budget with justification, must be the tally exactly to the amount the grant giver intends to give or less. Okay. Dineo, I don't know if this is a question or not. So if most funders do indicate how much they are funding for. So in this case, if they're saying that they are giving 120,000 rand, yes, most definitely. You cannot ask for 121,000 rand. You can ask for 100,000 rand. That's absolutely fine. It doesn't mean that you've under budgeted. It just means for the project that you are proposing, that's how much you're going to need. And so your budget, as we said, it's aligned to your work plan. So if your work plan requires 100,000 rand based on all the different items that you're going to require for your work, then yes, that's absolutely fine. So it won't work against you to request for less than is offered, okay? But you cannot ask for more than what the funder is offering you. Okay. All right, Tumeleng, I'm happy that you are happy. Good evening, Fretal. I understand that the Higher Degree Committee is sitting around the end of September 2023 to review or assess proposals for master's or doctoral degrees. Kindly share with us, how does the Higher Degree Committee review or assess proposals? Okay, Fretal, you need to understand all the different colleges have got different times that they sit, and some departments also have the different times that they sit. At the moment, it's still decentralized, right? So each college has its own committees, and within colleges, there's also departments that have got their own committees as well. But within the college, there is the Higher Degrees Committee of the college, where all the higher committee degrees committee members from the departments come together. It offers them the opportunity to share ideas. It offers them the opportunity to share some of the challenges that they're experiencing. It offers them the opportunity to engage on new policy matters. They engage on issues around funding for the students. So all of those things are discussed at the college Higher Degrees Committee, where at college level, there's a Higher Degrees Committee coordinator, and that's the person who chairs that committee, right? So that committee is not the one that looks at proposals, because that would be tricky, because within the different colleges, we've got different departments, different disciplines. So I'm in the human sciences, I cannot assess proposals that come from linguistics department or from the history department, because I do not understand the nuances, the theories, and all the information that is linked to that discipline, that department. So that's why it's not a central thing, it's decentralized. So the Higher Degrees Committee would be the Higher Degrees Committee of your department. And if your committee is sitting around September, that's going to be your departmental Higher Degrees Committee that's going to be reviewing the proposals and doctorate. Other higher degree, they sit regularly because you all don't finish your proposals at the same time. So if maybe someone managed to complete their proposal in June, they cannot wait until September, October for their work to be looked at, because what's the student then doing in the meantime? So that's why they meet regularly. My academic department that I used to be associated with, I know that when it comes to reviewing the proposals, they have committee members whose role is to assign reviewers. So they don't sit as the committee to look at the proposals, but there are reviewers that are identified, that the submissions go to the Higher Degrees Committee, and then the committee distributes to the various reviewers. That way, the process keeps being ongoing in that sense. However, in other departments, I know that the committee is the one that sits, and when they sit, they look at the proposals, they engage and they review the proposals, and then they give feedback. Okay, so that's just the background in terms of how the different systems and the different departments and the different colleges function. So you were saying, how does the higher degree committee review or assess proposals? They assess proposals. Some departments have got a template, right? And some departments, it's a general understanding of looking at the scientific merit of the work that you have put together as a student. So what is it that they look at? They look at the things that we've been talking about. So they look at whether your problem is clearly defined. They look at your problem statement. And if it's not clear, they will indicate that it's not clear. Please revise in this way or that way, or please restate the problem. This does not make sense. And they give feedback on all the different aspects of your proposal. So that's how they do it. So they will sit together as the committee. The application or the proposals would come in. They would be distributed among the committee members, and then a date is set where the committee members will sit together and then discuss and engage on the proposals. And then a decision and a report will then be written, which will be submitted to the supervisor and yourself with the feedback and suggestions and recommendations from the review committee. So in the department that I was in, the proposals are sent to the reviewers, and then the reviewers would read, look at whether your methodology is sound, whether your methodology speaks to your hypothesis or your research question, whether your aims and objectives do make sense, your statement, problem statement, as I've indicated, whether it's clear that you've consulted literature, and how you've engaged with the literature. So they give that feedback. So the sessions that we've been having since a couple of months ago here on this platform is meant, they are meant, these sessions are meant to assist you and to prepare you to put together as good a proposal as possible, and to also anticipate what it is that the reviewers are looking for. So the things that we've been paying attention to are the things that the reviewers are going to be looking at. And then they give you feedback. And then based on that feedback, you revise, you resubmit if you need to resubmit. Sometimes they say everything seems to be in place, but there are these issues that require attention. And so give attention to these, working alongside with the assistance of your supervisor. We don't need to see the proposal again. If the supervisor is happy that you've attended to the issues that we've raised, then that's okay. Usually, when it comes back like that, then it means you've passed your proposal. So it will indicate that you've passed your proposal pending these revisions that need to be done. And you need to submit, the supervisor needs to submit a letter indicating that you've attended to those issues. And then after that, then can you apply for your ethics clearance? So even though you would have spoken to issues of ethics in your proposal, there's an ethics committee that is going to be looking at the ethical issues of your research. And then when they're happy, you will get ethical clearance to do your work. Okay, I hope that answers your question. So yes, they review it by reading it, having a look at it, looking at the scientific merit, looking at ensuring or ascertaining that all the different aspects that need to be in a proposal are there. And if they're happy with that, then you pass your proposal. Okay. Hello, Moraba. In writing the proposal, you are mentioning that funders are willing to give someone who happened to get funded before. I've received a bursary before when I was doing my honors and masters. Can I use this in my motivation? I'm assuming that you mean when you are applying for funding now for your PhD studies. Yes, definitely. You may mention that, and you can, and I suggest that you do mention that you have received bursary for your previous qualifications. And this is something that can also be indicated in the CV itself. Remember that the funder is going to be looking at and reading your CV. So you may put it in the motivation or reiterate it in the motivation, but make sure that it's in your CV as well. So awards and grants, you indicate there that you received this bursary and this year, you received that bursary in this year, and for what they were for. Okay, so you most definitely can indicate that you have received that funding before. And all the best as you apply for funding for your doctoral studies. Okay, hi, as what guidelines would you offer in cases when the requested budget for the experimental project exceeds the absolute lowest that the sponsor is willing to provide for the project? When the budget for the experimental project exceeds the absolute lowest for the sponsor that the sponsor is willing to provide for the project, which items on the list ought to be dropped and which ought to be kept? For you to decide what to include in your budget and not to include in your budget has to be determined by your work plan, right? So I've indicated the importance of the project description and the work plan. So what is absolutely necessary for you to be able to do this research, knowing that with this equipment, for me to run my experiments or to do work that I need to do in the lab, with this equipment, I'll be able to do that work. And without this equipment, then the whole project would not make sense, or the whole project might be negatively affected. Then that means you need to include that in your budget. So you need to look at the whole item list of what you need, alongside the money that is required, right? So here are 10 items that you need. And with these 10 items, here's the work plan. This is what's required. So you need to check what is absolutely necessary. I know all the items are necessary, that's why you have them there. But what can make or break the project? What is it that you can do without at the beginning because of the limited funds that are available to you? So you need to be able to sit and check what is feasible and what is not, but ensuring that it's not going to compromise the project that you want to do, the experiment that you want to do, right? So you're asking which items on the list ought to be dropped and which ought to be kept, right? Alternatively, what would you consider to be the list's most important items in the case of research by experiment? Or maybe the researcher has to alter the project's goal to comply with the fundraising threshold. Yes, I think you've answered yourself there as well. You can alter the project's goal to comply with the funding threshold. And this means maybe you can think of your project in stages, right? That this is what I can do first. This is what I can do second. This can wait. It can be a follow-up, something I can do later. And this also means, again, and I would encourage you, this also means that you should not limit yourself to just one funder or one funding opportunity. And if maybe this is a project beyond your PhD, for example, you can also look at the possibility of reaching out to the university itself to assist maybe in funding some of the aspects that the funder might not be able to fund, right? So for you to know whether to alter your project or how to alter your project, you need to first decide what is the goal, the main goal of the project. What is it that I want to achieve? And what are the different steps that are necessary? You know, when you run experiments, when you do experimental research, there are things that are absolutely necessary for you to run the experiments that you need to run, so that your results are not affected because something was not in place. And so that's why it's important for you to check first, what is it that is needed? What is it that's in place? What is it that you already have, maybe that you can use that exists, right? And then you can look at how to then complement or supplement that which already exists. But if you're starting from point zero, then you can maybe go back and rethink your project goal and work on this to ensure that you put together a project that's not going to fail, because there are things that could not be achieved because of funding. And that's why funders do indicate how much they are willing to provide. So you plan with that money in mind. If they're going to give you 5 million rand, as you plan your project, you plan with the 5 million rand in mind. And you check whether is it necessary for you to have 3 research assistants that are going to work with you in the lab, or can you manage with 1 research assistant, which means there's 2 now whose salaries you don't have to worry about. So that also affects your project as well, right? It might mean you're going to work extra hours because you have less hands than you would have wanted to, but you can still be able to do the work. So you need to consider all of these things when it comes to planning your project, right? And I'm imagining that you won't need to alter the project goal unless if you already had a project in mind and you had already planned it to some extent before this funding came along. So it was not aligned to the funding, or it was not as a result of the funding that you said, oh, okay, here's funding, it's aligned to my research, let me put together a project. Because when you do that, then you don't need to alter anything. It just means you need to work on your project plan already in mind, having the amount, the funder, what they can provide. And that way, you don't need to alter anything because you're planning based on the funding that is available. Okay, so that lessens your work as well. But if you've done research, or you have a project and you've been looking for funding for that project, yes, then maybe you might need to alter 1 or 2 things. Okay. Can I apply for funding while I'm currently applying for PhD in 2024? I'm busy with the outline of the research. You can apply for the NRF funding. Yes, most definitely. So Tutuka, for example. So there they just need surety that you have someone who's going to be a supervisor, because your supervisor also has to approve, and they're going to send that person a link to be able to support your research. So sometimes when you're working on the outline, you don't necessarily have a supervisor, but you might have identified someone. So send that person an email. Dear Professor Khalo, I'm thinking of applying for a PhD. I'm busy with my outline. My theme or broad topic is around this area, and I would like you to consider being my supervisor. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I'll consider it. And then they say, I'm also applying for a bursary, and they want to know whether I already have a supervisor identified. May I put your name down? One thing you don't want to do, don't put somebody's name down without their consent. That's not going to turn out good for you. Okay. You know what, Muraba? I'm going to need to just double check something for you in terms of applying for funding while you are busy with the outline. Because as things stand, in my current understanding, things change all the time. With UNISA, with the bursary at UNISA, you need to have successfully completed your proposal before you can apply for a bursary. And the logic or the idea behind that was that The bursary is aimed at assisting you to do the actual research, and you do the actual research when you already completed your proposal and you've got your ethical clearance. So you need the money to be able to go and conduct research, go to the field, buy the equipment that you need, transcribe, translate, all of those things, right? Do the actual research. And that was the logic behind saying at proposal stage or proposal level, what is it that you need the money for really, except maybe just paying for the registration fee. And as far as I know, that's how things stand at the moment. That's with the internal financial support at UNISA. But I would like to encourage you to also look at possible external funding. If you are in the social sciences, there's the NHSS that you can also go to their website and start checking their website and looking at the course and what it is that's required for you to apply for funding with them. And if you're not in the social sciences or humanities, NRF is an option, because NRF is for all of us. It's for us in the natural or pure sciences, is for us in the social sciences or humanities. So those are the other possible external avenues that you can consider, that I think it might be possible for you to apply for funding for the year 2024. But for internal funding, I think you would need to complete next year first, and you can apply for 2025. Okay. Yeah, I hear you. You couldn't proceed with your studies due to lack of registration fee. Yeah, and I guess that's what I was speaking to right now. Hey, that if you are not at the research phase yet, the idea of applying for funding is so that you can be able to get money to apply for your registration fee. And I understand that. I understand that very well. But I hope you understand the logic that the university has been using. And now that things have changed, that you don't have we don't have proposal module anymore, where when you apply for the qualification. Obviously, you start with the proposal, but it's not a separate module anymore. I have not heard yet whether there's going to be a rethinking in terms of funding in that regard, seeing that you're immediately applying for the PhD and not the proposal module. So I'm not sure of that, but please check other avenues of funding, because with them there might be possibility of assistance. And what they sometimes do also is to reimburse. So because we've got closing date in terms of registration and registration period, if you do manage to put money together to pay for your registration fee, and then you are successful with your application for funding, there might be a possibility that you can get a reimbursement for your registration fee. Okay, so those are the possibilities that are there for you. So good luck with that. Yes, Anonymous, are the grants application open only for next year? Yes, I've mentioned this yesterday, that unfortunately we are late into the year right now. And I guess it's something for us to think about. I'm also looking at my colleagues, Bronwyn and Tinel, maybe as we think about our plans for the future in terms of the scheduling of the sessions, maybe this is something that might come earlier for students who might want to know and understand about grant application and possible avenues where they can apply. And then maybe they can get the information earlier on and consider applying for grants in that academic year. Because now, as we're talking about grant application, it's almost October. There is no way you can get a grant that's going to provide you funding for 2023. It's just not possible. It's the end of the year. So what we are looking towards is grants for 2024 onwards. And even with the the funders themselves. So even if the calls are out now, I had mentioned earlier about some calls that we got earlier about at the grants for projects. The closing date is the 10th of October or the 29th of September, but this is for 2024, 2025. So you apply, there are some grant applications where you can apply now, but then the grant itself would be later in next year. And these are usually like your international funders. And as you know, our academic years are not the same as we start in January. So if they're going to give you funding into the second part of the year when the academic year for other countries only starts, then again, it might be tricky. But for local applications, yeah, it's not possible at all for funding for 2023 academic year for the money to be available this year. No, it's not possible at all. Okay. Hello, Paul. Earlier on during one of the blast sessions, we were given an opportunity to submit our work to one email that was shared. Okay, I see that my colleague Dineo has responded to you. Yeah, and I think that email was also sent to everybody to offer you the opportunity to submit your work. This is still an open invitation that if you would like to submit your proposal before Fratel, you submit it to the Higher Degrees Committee, that opportunity is still there. But if it's already submitted to the Higher Degrees Committee, then maybe it might not be so useful anymore. But even if you're working on your chapters, any chapter, chapter 1, chapter 5, chapter 3, you have the opportunity to submit those to the email address that has been given here so that you are able to get the opportunity for feedback and reviews on your work over and above the feedback that you get from your supervisor. So it means another pair of eyes offering you feedback on your work. Okay, and it's indicated there that the turnaround is 2 weeks. So when you think about your own planning in terms of when you want to submit the next chapter to your supervisor, and if maybe you want to get feedback from us first before you do that, you need to know that as you submit, if you were to submit it tomorrow, you would need to give the reviewers 2 weeks before you get feedback. And again, it depends on people's workload. So it might actually be a little over 2 weeks, but minimum 2 weeks at the most. Okay. All right. How do the funders monitor the financial expenditures? If they are concerned with researchers' spending, can the funder withdraw the fund, and what are consequences thereof? Easy. The consequence is that you will be required to pay the money. Remember, when the funder gives you the money, you sign a contract. There's always a contract. So when you sign that contract, you are making a commitment that I shall do as I promised in my application. I did not promise things that I do not intend to do, right? So there is always a contract. No one is going to give you money and then hope for the best. We don't live in that kind of world. So there is a contract, and based on that contract, it then becomes clear what the consequences would be. Okay, and yes, the funders do monitor. And I had indicated in the earlier sessions that there are quarterly reports that are required by the funders. And this is their way of monitoring and also checking the progress of the work that you're doing. If it's funding that's linked to your academic qualification, then the supervisor also becomes part of the equation as well. Give the example with the NHSS. I've had doctoral students who were awarded the NHSS grant, and when the reporting period comes, the student has to submit their report of their progress, but I, as the supervisor, also has to submit a report. So I become part of the equation, because when the student applied at the beginning, I supported the application. So often when you apply for master's or doctoral financial support, the supervisor becomes part of that. As I was answering someone earlier saying, when you are applying, for example, and you're still busy with your outline, they would want to know your supervisor, because the supervisor has to also complete something. So this is what I'm referring to as well. So I'm also held accountable in some ways, in that I also need to provide a report, and then I need to indicate. So if they're saying they're going to fund you for the duration of your qualification, it's always dependent on the progress that you're making. So if you're not making satisfactory progress, and maybe my report says, yeah, we were hoping for 3 chapters, only 1 chapter was completed, then that's not satisfactory progress, right? And then it means that you might not get funding going forward. They do tend to be lenient. So what some funders will do is that they will just not continue giving you the money for the coming year, but they would not necessarily expect you to pay what they've already given you. So some are lenient like that, especially if it's national money or a government money. Often they wouldn't. They'll just say, okay, we're stopping now. We're not going to give you any more money because you're not making any progress. But often if it's private donors, private funders, they tend to be more strict. You know, it's always that thing again of the public and the private institutions and the ways in which they do things. Our public institutions tend to be quite generous sometimes. So they'll just stop funding you going forward and not expecting the money back. But some of the private donors will say, give us back what we've already given you. Okay. All right, so this is another practical logistical question about someone who submitted and still waiting for the review report of the chapter they submitted. Okay. Okay, as my budget reached more than 120, I did alter the research, the fundraising threshold, then looked for a second funder with the leftover project goal to complete all the goals. Excellent, yes. That's absolutely what you must do. Absolutely. Look for more funding. That always helps. Then you can be able to achieve all the activities and the goals that you set out for yourself. Wonderful. Okay, colleagues, I think this is also another practical question. I sent chapters of my proposal to that email. It's after almost a month. Okay, I think that has been responded to. Please send an email following up and indicating when you send your chapters, and my colleagues will make sure that they attend to it, and that this is responded to efficiently. Apologies for that. I think, as my colleague indicated, sometimes it might have been sent to a colleague who maybe thought they'll have time to look at it, but then other pressing matters came up, and then there was a delay. But to get the proper response, please just follow up, and hopefully you get your response soon. Okay. But thank you for indicating it so that steps can be taken to make sure that we follow up on that issue. Okay, hello, Idris. What's the full name of National Humanities? Okay, the acronym is NIHSS, National Institute for the Humanities and Social Sciences. Okay, I repeat, it's the National Institute for the Humanities and Social Sciences, acronym NIHSS. Okay. All right. I'm not seeing any more questions. I hope everybody has been answered and everything is clear. So this brings us to the end of the grant writing session, the third of the 3-part series of the grant writing sessions. I hope that everything is clear to you, and that you consider applying for grants. to assist you with your own work, but also as part of making sure that you build up a CV and build your profile also as a scholar. We will have future sessions as we move towards the end of the year. You will get the opportunity to maybe ask questions that you did not get to ask. Maybe as you start thinking or applying for grants, you might get stuck somewhere or have questions as you go along. So we're going to have blast sessions where you can ask whatever you want pertaining to any of the sessions that we've had thus far. So I look forward to the next blast session where we can just have a conversation and attend to some of the issues that might be troubling you. Again, a quick reminder, tomorrow's blast session that was going to be specifically focused on the questions around grant writing is not going to be happening. So I hope that your questions have been answered, because there's not going to be a session tomorrow to attend to the questions that you might still be having. But as I indicated, we're going to have blast sessions in the coming month. And should you still have any questions, the opportunity to ask those will be there at those blast sessions. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, dear students, please enjoy the rest of your evening. And I look forward to engaging with you again in a week or two. All right, goodbye, everybody.